Actually, I would oppose it much less. Turns out the more you study this, the more processed the fossil fuel is as gas towards end product use, the less dangerous it is in a spill, and the better quality the pipeline has to be, which is another factor. Bitumen is such junk. Bitumen is so contaminated as a product that they don't mind so much if the pipeline is rusty or dirty or anything, because bitumen is not even crude. Now, if you were to upgrade the crude in northern Alberta and create synthetic crude would be less of a risk of spill. It still wouldn't be good. If you upgrade all the way to, say, gasoline by refining it there, if you have a gasoline spill, as we discovered, it was horrible when that fuel trunk went into Goldstream. But salmon was back in the stream within a year. If that had been bitumen or crude or anything else, salmon would be wiped out for decades. Because what happens is, the more processed the fuel is, you have to have, number one, you have to have a cleaner pipeline. You can't afford any contamination at all if you're shipping gasoline. And on top of that, it volatilizes into the atmosphere very quickly. Whereas bitumen mixed with diluent, we don't know quite what it does, but it's been 3 years since the Kalamazoo, Michigan spill. And it's not even close to cleaned up because the bitumen and the diluent separate from each other. So some of it's contaminated with benzene and, as we were talking about, other naphtha-like toxics. That's the diluent. The bitumen itself probably sinks, or maybe it floats before it sinks. No one's really sure. Basically, I'd be much happier with the following scenario. We stop expanding the oil sands because it's the constant expansion of the oil sands. Well, there's many reasons to stop expanding the oil sands. The number one reason is the climate crisis. But in terms of the economics for northern Alberta, the reason they didn't build the upgraders that were planned in 2008, they were withdrawn from the planning horizon because of the financial crisis. Most of the development that was planned before 2008 for northern Alberta came back when the financial crisis was over, except the upgraders. The upgraders for northern Alberta were replaced by the Keystone Pipeline proposal. We won't bother upgrading in northern Alberta. We'll just mix this bitumen, which can't flow by itself, with the diluent, and ship it to the Gulf of Mexico coast, where there are refineries owned by those nice boys, the Koch brothers, who would really like to have their undercapacity refineries get that bitumen and diluent to deal with it there instead of allowing it to be processed in Alberta. So why we don't upgrade or refine close to the resource in northern Alberta is because the more that Stephen Harper and a lot of the fossil fuel industry are committed to 6 million barrels of oil a day, or which is really 6 million barrels of bitumen a day, out of the oil sands. Now, current levels of production, at least last year, was 1.8 million barrels. So they want to more than triple production levels. That involves constant expansions of these devastatingly destructive mines and in situ production. If you were to, and that constant production creates an inflationary bubble over northern Alberta, which is why it's the most expensive place in the world to operate a Tim Hortons. You can't do anything in northern Alberta because there's a shortage of capital and a shortage of labor because everything's overpriced, everything's overheated. So if you said there's no more expansion, we don't want more than 2 million barrels of oil a day, and we're only going to allow that to go on as long as we have a climate plan that shuts down all the coal plants in Canada. You know, there's a lot of other aspects of this. But just in terms of the economics of bitumen production, then you can have upgraders, then you can have refineries. You wouldn't be ever, like I think there should be like a rule that we never, ever put any bitumen and diluent into anything. Because you ship the diluent up first. Enbridge plans to buy their diluent for the Northern Gateway project. This is their evidence to the Northern Gateway pipeline hearings. They're going to buy the diluent from the Middle East. They're going to ship it in tankers first, offload the diluent to the Twin pipeline in Kitimat, ship the diluent up to northern Alberta, then mix it with the bitumen and ship it back. The whole thing's nuts. But it's nuts economically. I mean, it's obviously nuts environmentally, and most of us talk about the environmental aspect. We forget that they haven't justified it economically. It's just nuts. So if we can just say, look, Canadians don't want raw log exports. We don't want raw fish exports. We want value added. We don't want raw bitumen exports. If you're going to produce this junk in northern Alberta, process it there. It's safer for transit. We still are using some for quite a while. Let's have energy security. So I wouldn't mind as much if it was diesel, honestly. I'd rather use biodiesel and not fossil fuels. But the argument is I think, more interesting when we take them on their own turf and say, what makes you think this makes any sense economically? It only makes sense for the Koch brothers.